Call the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the House for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Our vision for Australia and Australians is that they will be able to be independent. That is what we would hope for every Australian, that they would be able to be independent financially wherever that's possible. And that's what we seek to encourage at every opportunity, whether that's to find themselves in work, whether that's to find themselves saving for their retirement and to be able to draw down on their hard-earned savings in their retirement to provide for their quality of life in their retirement. That's why they work so hard for it. That is why the governments now, for a long period of time, have provided support through the tax system to encourage people to do exactly that, to actually have a superannuation pool that enables them to live well in their retirement. That is the reward of a lifetime of hard work, of diligence and of saving. And so that is our goal. For middle-income earners, as the topic of debate today is focused on, but for all Australians, regardless of their level of means or opportunity, whether it's people with disabilities or whether it's with those who have had very difficult starts to life or wherever that is, our goal is to make sure that they can realise their potential and that they can become financially independent. This is not a welfare nation. This is a nation of free, independent people who want to have their own choices and be able to guide their own lives and not have their futures dictated to them by the government and the cheques that are sent to them. We have a very different and I think more aspirational view of the Australian population, that they would aspire and that they would do everything in their power to ensure that they would not be dependent on financial support from the government wherever possible. Now, there are those in the community who need that, and that's what it's there for. Yep, that's right. And we know that the welfare system is a safety net, and we know that the pension is a welfare payment, and the pension is there as a safety net for people who, for whatever reason, over the course of their life, have been unable to accumulate the savings that they would need to support themselves in their retirement. And for those particularly at this time, where the superannuation system has not come to full maturation, there are still those who are coming through the system who will be more reliant on the pension than others. But it is important to recognise that the pension is a welfare payment. It is not superannuation. It is not savings that people are spending. It is a safety net for those who really need it and those who need it most. And we want to focus on a fairer and more sustainable pension. The pension currently costs around $42 billion, and we know that's increasing. And it will continue to increase on the projections that are before us, and we simply just can't stick in our head in the sand and think you can just keep pushing the bill onto the taxpayer and not fundamentally thinking about, well, is the system that the pension is running on fair and is it sustainable, Mr Deputy Speaker? And so we have engaged in a process. Where we are looking to put a measure in place that will ensure a fairer and more sustainable pension. Over the next 20 to 30 years, more Australians will come to benefit from the maturation of the superannuation system and the pool of investment that they've been able to accumulate. And you know why that was done? You know why Labor actually did that in the first place? So that in the future that more Australians would not have to rely on welfare payments in the form of the pension. The whole point of superannuation tax incentives was so that people wouldn't have to depend on welfare in the future. And that's what the pension's for. And that's what superannuation's for. And those opposites seem to fundamentally misunderstand the difference between a government welfare payment and someone's own money in the form of superannuation. So, with this background, Mr Deputy Speaker, and understanding the fiscal challenges that the country has, what we did is we set out to find a way for a sustainable pension and that it was a fairer pension. And it is true that we put a measure before the last budget, and in that measure we sought to curtail the growth in the pension based on linking the indexation to the CPI only. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, we have abandoned that position because we listened to the Australian people. We listened to the Australian people and we worked through this issue and we said, fair enough. fair enough. There is another way to deal with this issue, and we said we aren't going to walk away from the task of having a fairer and more sustainable pension, and we engaged with stakeholders, Mr Deputy Speaker, and we engaged with the sector, and we engaged with people in this place and the other place to ensure that we could come up with a proposal and a measure that would be able to secure the support of this parliament. And so, whether it was Senator Xenophon or Senator Leonholm or others in the other place, or indeed stakeholders like ACOS, Mr Deputy Speaker, it was actually ACOS that brought to me a proposal which would seek to rebalance the assets test for the pension. Those great bastions of unfairness in ACOS, according to those opposite. ACOS, the Australian Council of Social Services, brought to me a proposal to ensure we would have a fair and sustainable pension by rebalancing the assets test for the pension. And you know what they suggested? They suggested that we should actually be bringing down the total level of assets that people can have in order to maintain access to a part pension. They said, no, it's not right to be providing government welfare payments to people on much higher level of assets. We should be focusing the pension on those on lower levels of assets. And we thought this was a fairly useful contribution to the debate, and there are others at the time who had similar views. Certainly the Council of the Ageing has been a consistent participant in this debate, and originally the National Seniors Australia also provided very strong support in the discussions we have had with them. But you know, there will be those who will stay with the policy and there will be those who will walk away. But what we will never walk away from is the importance of having a fairer and more sustainable pension. So we put forward a measure, actually a measure, Mr Deputy Speaker, which was not, frankly, as harsh as the measure that was put to us by ACOS. It was a more moderate proposal, which they would acknowledge. And the measure was to change the taper rate and to change the assets thresholds at the assets-free area and the maximum level of assets to rebalance the pension in favour of those on lower assets. And what that did, Mr Deputy Speaker, is it reversed the changes to the taper rates on the pension that existed back in 2007. So the taper rates we currently have at $1.50 rather than $3 have only been there since 2007. And you know who voted against the changes back in 2007? It was the Greens. The Greens back in 2007 didn't agree with the changes in those taper rates. And the Greens have indicated through their agreement with the government last night that they are simply going to remain consistent with the position that they held in 2007. Now, I don't agree with the Greens very often, Mr Deputy Speaker, and there are still many areas where we are in wild disagreement. But I will say this about the Greens, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I cannot say about those opposite on almost any measure. At least the Greens are consistent. They were consistent in their appalling views about border protection policy, but at least they were consistent. These ones opposite flipped and they flopped and they went all over the place and they flip and flop to this day. But the Greens were at least consistent. And I consistently disagreed with them, Mr Deputy Speaker. And on this measure, the Greens have simply acted in accordance with the convictions that they held back in 2007. Now, what's changed for the government since 2007 in changing these measures? What's changed for the government is this. When the greatest treasurer we ever had, Peter Costello, the greatest treasure, something that the member for Lilly never troubled his predecessor with, in terms of a claim to that title. When he made these changes, what was different then to now? $20 billion surplus and $40 billion in the bank. Where did that go? Where did that go? 6 years of the killing season on the budget. That's what we saw, the killing season on the budget by those opposite, and that strength of our fiscal position is gone. And you know, there are consequences for bad fiscal management, and that means you have to make savings and you have to make decisions about the sustainability of welfare measures, and that's what this does. And so we have reversed those measures back from 2007 and we have put in place a more sustainable pension. But those opposite, you know, they stand here with their usual playing politics and seeking to play the politics of motions on the pensions.
No, negative.
But if they're serious, I challenge each one of their speakers, if they're really serious about their strong stand on the pension, come to this dispatch box and say you'll reverse this measure if you win the next election. I'll tell you what the cost is. It's $2.4 billion. And unless you can say that, unless you can say that it is a simple piece of paper which means absolutely nothing. But we know you can't trust Bill Shorten, because that's what Mark Arbib told us, and he should know. He should know. He should know, Mr Deputy Speaker. Those opposite, if they have a serious position on this issue, will come to the dispatch box and say that they are going to reverse this measure if passed. They won't say it, though.